Some scars tell stories of cowardice, but Hannah Peterson's told a story of courage that her husband had chosen to forget. The thin line that traced from her left temple to her cheekbone caught the crystal chandelier light as she moved through the Manhattan ballroom. Each sparkle a reminder of the night she'd thrown herself between Mitchell Johnson and a shattered wine bottle meant for his skull. "Look at her trying to play the part," whispered Margaret Whitman, wife of the city's second-largest developer, her voice carrying just loud enough for Hannah to hear. "All the designer gowns in the world can't hide damaged goods." Hannah's spine straightened, her chin lifting with the grace that had first captivated Mitchell 6 years ago when she'd been a promising architect and he'd been an ambitious developer seeking her expertise. She'd heard worse tonight. What cut deeper than their cruelty was the silence from the man who owed his life to her sacrifice. The same man who'd once promised that her courage would never go undefended. Mitchell stood 30 feet away, champagne flute in hand, laughing at something Senator Reynolds had said about municipal development contracts. His perfectly tailored tuxedo emphasized the broad shoulders that had once shielded her from the world's judgment. Shoulders that had trembled when she'd bled for him 2 years ago. Now those same shoulders turned away whenever the conversation grew uncomfortable, whenever protecting her required more than passive presence. "I heard she was quite the ambitious little thing before she got her hooks into him," continued Catherine Walsh, her diamonds catching light as she gestured dismissively toward Hannah. "Some nobody architect who thought she could climb the social ladder through marriage and manipulation." The irony burned like acid in her chest. These women, draped in jewels bought with their husbands' inherited wealth, had no idea that every major project in Mitchell's portfolio had been conceived, strategized and executed by the nobody architect they were mocking. The 40-story luxury complex on Fifth Avenue that had made him famous. Hannah's vision, her innovative use of sustainable materials that had won 3 international awards. The mixed-use development in Brooklyn that had transformed a struggling neighborhood. Her community-focused design that balanced gentrification with preservation. The international expansion into sustainable housing markets that had doubled their worth in 2 years. Her strategic planning, her relationships with European environmental councils, her understanding of global building standards. Mother always said Mitchell needed someone more suitable. Margaret Johnson's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade dipped in honey. Mitchell's mother had perfected the art of delivering insults wrapped in silk, her words carrying the weight of old money and older prejudices. Someone who could represent the family name without causing awkward questions about backgrounds and breeding. The phrase "awkward questions" hung in the air like smoke, a coded reference to Hannah's Detroit roots, her working-class parents, her scholarship to architecture school, and the melanin in her skin that made certain social circles uncomfortable. Hannah had learned to navigate these conversations with the precision of a surgeon, cutting through ignorance without creating scenes that would reflect poorly on Mitchell's business interests. Hannah turned toward the group, her movement fluid and deliberate, carrying the same confidence that had once made her the youngest woman ever to win the American Institute of Architects' Young Architect Award. The women fell silent, their eyes darting between her scar and her unflinching gaze, suddenly remembering that she was more than just Mitchell's accessory. "Ladies," Hannah said, her voice carrying the warmth of honey poured over steel, each word precisely calibrated for maximum impact. "I hope you're enjoying the party. This ballroom renovation was actually one of my architectural projects from last year. The sustainable lighting system and the acoustic design that allows conversation without microphones. I thought you might appreciate the craftsmanship, especially since it saved the hotel approximately $40,000 annually in energy costs." Margaret Whitman's face flushed beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Oh, we had no idea you were so involved in the technical aspects. I'm involved in everything that matters to my husband's success." Hannah replied, each word measured and precise, carrying implications that made the women shift uncomfortably. Perhaps that's something your husbands have mentioned during their business discussions. The strategic planning sessions, the environmental impact studies, the international partnership negotiations. The group began to disperse like smoke before wind, their whispered conversations resuming at a safer distance where Hannah's intelligence couldn't challenge their assumptions. She had learned long ago that confronting ignorance with superior knowledge was far more effective than confronting it with righteous anger, though both approaches required careful timing and execution. She made her way across the ballroom with the measured pace of someone who belonged in every space she entered, acknowledging business partners who owed their success to her innovative strategies, socialites who lived in buildings she'd designed with cutting-edge environmental systems, politicians whose campaigns had been funded by developments she'd orchestrated to revitalize struggling urban areas. They smiled at her face while their eyes lingered on her scar, never knowing they were looking at the architect of their host's empire. The brilliant mind behind every success they attributed to Mitchell's business acumen. Mrs. Johnson. The voice belonged to Blake Morrison, Mitchell's newest business rival and the CEO of Morrison Development Group. I've been hoping to speak with you about the Portland project. Hannah's eyes sharpened with the focus that had made her legendary among New York's architectural community. The Portland project was Mitchell's most ambitious venture, a billion-dollar sustainable development that could secure their company's dominance for the next decade while setting new standards for environmentally conscious urban planning. It was also entirely her brainchild, from the initial concept through the complex regulatory navigation that had made it possible. What about it, Mr. Morrison? I've heard rumors about some complications, environmental concerns that could shut down the project entirely, regulatory challenges that might prove insurmountable. His smile was predatory, the expression of someone who specialized in identifying weaknesses and exploiting them. I wanted to offer my assistance, should you need alternative options or strategic partnerships. The threat was barely veiled, wrapped in the language of professional courtesy, but carrying the clear implication that Morrison had inside information about confidential aspects of their project. Blake had somehow learned about the environmental impact study that Hannah had been quietly managing, the delicate negotiations with federal agencies that could derail everything if not handled with perfect precision. That's very kind of you, Hannah said, her expression betraying nothing, while her mind rapidly calculated the implications of his knowledge. But I'm quite confident in our ability to handle any challenges that arise. The Portland project represents cutting-edge sustainable development practices that will benefit the entire Pacific Northwest region. Blake's smile widened with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully planted seeds of doubt, of course. Though I wonder how confident Mr. Johnson would be without his strategic advisor. Such a demanding project requires hands-on expertise that not everyone possesses. The implication hung in the air like poison gas, a suggestion that Mitchell's success depended entirely on Hannah's contributions and would collapse without her involvement. Hannah excused herself with professional grace and found Mitchell near the bar, still laughing with his associates, still pretending not to notice the stares and whispers that followed his wife wherever she went. "We need to talk," she said quietly, appearing at his elbow with the sudden presence that had once thrilled him during their courtship. Mitchell's smile faltered slightly, his politician's instincts recognizing the tone that meant serious business discussions. "Hannah, I'm in the middle of—" "Now, Mitchell." Something in her voice, perhaps the echo of authority that had guided him through countless business crises, made him excuse himself from the group with apologetic charm. They found privacy in an alcove overlooking Central Park, where the city lights twinkled below like fallen stars and the sounds of the party became a distant hum. Blake Morrison approached me, Hannah began without preamble, her voice carrying the urgency that accompanied genuine threats to their empire. He knows about the Portland environmental issues, the federal regulatory challenges, possibly even the timeline complications we've been managing. Mitchell's face went pale beneath his carefully maintained tan. How is that possible? Those reports are confidential, sealed under federal environmental protection protocols. That's what we need to find out. But first, I need to know that you trust me to handle this situation with the discretion and expertise it requires. Of course I trust you. You've never let me down, never failed to find solutions when everyone else saw only problems. Then why didn't you defend me earlier tonight? Mitchell's confusion appeared genuine, his expression blank with the incomprehension of someone who had missed something significant. Defend you from what? Your mother's friends. They were making remarks about my scar, about me being unsuitable for you, about my background and breeding. Hannah's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered behind her eyes. You stood there listening and said nothing while they mocked the sacrifice I made, saving your life. Hannah, you're being too sensitive. They're just old socialites with nothing better to do than gossip about people they don't understand. The words hit her like a physical blow, each syllable landing with devastating precision. Too sensitive. About the scar she'd earned when broken glass, meant for his skull, had sliced across her face, while she shielded him with her own body. Too sensitive? Her voice remained calm, but the temperature in the alcove seemed to drop several degrees. I took a piece of glass to the face defending you from a business rival who wanted to destroy you, Mitchell. The least you could do is defend my honor when people mock that sacrifice. That's not fair. You know I appreciate what you did, how grateful I am for your courage that night. Appreciate. Hannah stepped back, studying her husband, as if seeing him clearly for the first time in their 3 years of marriage. You appreciate it? Like I performed some minor service that deserves acknowledgement? That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. The truth crystallized with painful clarity, sharp and unforgiving as the glass that had marked her face. You've never seen it as sacrifice. You've seen it as my job, my role as your wife, my function in your life. Mitchell's jaw tightened defensively. You're twisting my words. I never asked you to. No, you never asked. I just gave. My career, my architectural ambitions, my innovative designs, my face, my blood. Hannah's voice grew deadly quiet. And you've never asked because you've never had to. I've just been there, solving your problems, building your empire, managing your crises, while you take the credit and collect the accolades. That's not true, isn't it? Hannah's voice carried the precision of an architect examining flawed blueprints. Tell me, Mitchell, what's the projected completion date for the Portland project's Phase 1 construction? Mitchell faltered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. Why are you testing me on operational details? Because I want to know if my husband knows anything about the company he supposedly runs, the empire he claims to have built. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with the weight of 3 years' worth of unexamined assumptions and unacknowledged dependencies. Mitchell's mouth moved soundlessly, but no words came, because there were no words to come. He didn't know. After 3 years of marriage, 6 years of professional partnership, he didn't know the basic details of his own projects. The environmental impact study deadlines? Hannah continued with surgical precision. The zoning permit renewal dates? The construction timeline contingencies? The backup financing arrangements? Each question landed like a physical blow. Mitchell's face grew redder with each gap in his knowledge, each revelation of his dependence on systems he'd never bothered to understand. You don't know any of it, Hannah said, her voice devoid of emotion, clinical as a medical diagnosis. You don't know because you've never had to know. I've been the mind behind every decision, every strategy, every innovation, every success you've claimed as evidence of your business genius. Hannah, please. Your mother is right about one thing, Hannah interrupted with devastating calm. You do need someone more suitable. Someone who will smile and look decorative and let you pretend you built this empire with your own hands and your own vision. Mitchell's anger finally flared, fueled by embarrassment and the terrible recognition of his own inadequacy. Fine, maybe she is right. Maybe we have grown apart. Maybe I do need someone who fits better into my world instead of constantly challenging everything. The words hung in the air between them, irreversible and devastating, carrying the weight of a marriage's destruction and an empire's inevitable collapse. Hannah nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something she'd long suspected, but hoped wasn't true. Then let me make this easy for you, Mitchell. You want someone who fits your world without complications or challenges. You'll have exactly that by morning. She turned to leave with the measured grace that had always distinguished her, then paused, looking back over her shoulder with an expression that would haunt Mitchell's dreams for months to come. But when your empire crumbles without me, remember this moment. Remember that you chose their approval over my love, their comfort over my courage, their prejudice over my sacrifice. As Hannah walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of a funeral march, Mitchell had no idea that he'd just dismissed the only person who truly knew how to keep his billion-dollar world from collapsing into the rubble of his own incompetence and cowardice. Chapter 2. The Strategic Departure. Hannah Peterson had built empires with patience and demolished them with precision, and tonight she would perform both arts simultaneously. The elevator doors closed behind her as she left Mitchell in the ballroom, surrounded by the vultures who had spent the evening picking at her dignity while feasting on the success she had created with her brilliant mind and tireless dedication. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel doors, the scar catching the harsh fluorescent light like a badge of honor that had been transformed into a source of shame. She traced it with one finger, remembering the night that had changed everything. Mitchell bleeding on the sidewalk outside Romano's restaurant, his business rival Webb standing over him with a broken bottle, the moment she'd stepped between them without thinking. The glass had caught her temple, slicing down to her cheekbone in a perfect crescent that would mark her forever as the woman who'd saved Mitchell Johnson's life. "You saved my life," Mitchell had whispered in the hospital emergency room, holding her bandaged face in his hands while tears mixed with the blood on his shirt. "I'll never forget what you did for me, never." But he had forgotten. Not the incident itself, but the significance of it. He'd allowed it to become just another story in their shared history, rather than the defining moment that proved her devotion, her courage, her willingness to bleed for his success. The elevator opened on the parking level, and Hannah walked toward her car with the measured pace of someone who had already calculated every move that would follow. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mitchell. "Where did you go? We need to finish talking. Don't leave like this." She deleted the message without responding, her fingers moving with the same precision she brought to architectural blueprints. The drive to their penthouse took 23 minutes through Manhattan traffic. 23 minutes, during which Hannah Peterson mentally dismantled her husband's empire piece by piece. She'd built it carefully over 6 years, laying foundations he didn't understand, creating contingencies he'd never considered, establishing relationships he couldn't maintain. Now she would remove herself from the equation and watch physics do the rest. Their apartment was a testament to her architectural vision. 3,500 square feet of clean lines and natural light overlooking Central Park. She designed every detail herself, from the custom millwork that concealed advanced environmental systems to the hidden storage that contained the real nerve center of Mitchell's business operations. Hannah went directly to her study, a room Mitchell rarely entered because it contained things that bored him. Strategic documents, financial projections, architectural blueprints, environmental impact studies, and the kind of detailed planning that required actual intellectual work rather than inherited privilege and surface-level charm. She began with the active projects, pulling files that contained her analysis, her solutions, her forward-thinking strategies that had made Mitchell Johnson a name synonymous with innovative development. The Portland project alone filled 3 thick folders with her handwriting, her calculations, her innovative approaches to problems Mitchell didn't even know existed. Environmental impact assessments she'd commissioned privately through her contacts at the EPA. Zoning variance requests she'd filed through carefully cultivated relationships with city planning officials. Backup financing options she'd secured through her own professional network, built over years of architectural conferences and industry relationships. Each document went into a leather messenger bag that had been her graduation gift to herself from architecture school, back when she'd believed her career would be about creating beautiful, functional buildings rather than managing her husband's reputation, while her own achievements remained invisible. Next came the relationship capital she'd built over 6 years of strategic networking. Her personal contact list read like a directory of development, finance, and politics. City council members who respected her environmental approach to urban planning. Bank executives who trusted her financial projections because they'd never seen her miscalculate. Construction supervisors who appreciated her practical understanding of their challenges. Federal regulators who knew her by name and answered her calls personally. She composed emails with surgical precision. Dear Commissioner Hayes, I wanted to personally inform you that I'll no longer be involved with Johnson development projects going forward. I've greatly valued our collaboration on environmental compliance issues and hope we might work together on future endeavors. Best regards, Hannah Peterson. Send. Mr. Blackstone, thank you for your flexibility on the financing terms for our current projects. Please note that effective immediately, all communication should go directly through Mitchell Johnson, as I'll be stepping back from active involvement in strategic planning. I appreciate your understanding during this transition. Sincerely, Hannah. Send. 27 emails total, each one professionally courteous and devastatingly final. By morning, every person who had been working with Hannah Peterson would know she was no longer part of Mitchell's operation. They would draw their own conclusions about what that meant for pending projects, environmental compliance, regulatory relationships, and the innovative problem-solving that had distinguished Johnson Development from every competitor. The hardest part came next, her architectural designs, sketches and blueprints that had never been submitted under her name, innovations that Mitchell had presented as his own insights. Creative solutions that had separated Johnson Development from every competitor in the sustainable building market. She photographed every page with methodical precision, uploading them to a cloud storage account only she could access. Then she carefully placed each original drawing in a fireproof safe hidden behind a false wall in her closet. Let Mitchell try to recreate 6 years of creative work from memory and inherited privilege. Her laptop contained the real treasure, financial models that projected cash flow for the next 18 months, risk assessments that identified potential problems with pending deals before they became crises, strategic plans that outlined Mitchell's expansion into international markets. She copied everything to an encrypted drive, then systematically deleted files from the shared business folders Mitchell had never bothered to examine. It was past midnight when she finally opened the desk drawer that contained her personal items. Her MBA diploma from Wharton, earned while working full-time as Mitchell's consultant. Her architectural license, which had impressed Mitchell enough to hire her before he'd been smart enough to marry her. Her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing her family had owned when she was growing up in Detroit's East Side. At the bottom of the drawer lay a small white box she'd hidden there 3 weeks ago, still unopened. She'd bought the pregnancy test after missing her period, but the chaos of managing Mitchell's crisis with the Portland project had distracted her from taking it. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been too busy saving her husband's career to notice she might be carrying his child. Hannah stared at the box for a long moment, then placed it on the desk, unopened. Some knowledge could wait until she was somewhere safe to process it, somewhere far from the man who had just chosen his mother's approval over her dignity. She moved through their bedroom like a ghost, taking only practical items, clothes for a week, her laptop, important documents, and enough cash to disappear completely. Her wedding ring came off with surprising ease after 3 years, leaving a pale band of skin that looked like a scar in reverse. She placed the ring on Mitchell's nightstand, next to a sealed envelope containing her house key and a letter written in her careful, architect's handwriting. "Mitchell, you wanted someone who fits your world better. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. But when your empire collapses without the mind that built it, remember that you chose their approval over my love. You chose comfort over courage. And you chose to mock the sacrifice that saved your life. Build your own success now. You'll discover how much of your genius was actually mine." Hannah. She walked through their apartment one final time, memorizing the life she was leaving behind. Every custom detail, every carefully chosen finish, every innovative solution that had made their home worthy of Architectural Digest features. Mitchell would keep living here, but he'd never understand what made it special because he'd never bothered to learn. The elevator descended silently, carrying Hannah away from the penthouse that had been her prison disguised as a palace. Her phone showed 7 missed calls from Mitchell and a string of increasingly frantic texts. "Hannah, where are you? Please don't leave like this. We can work this out. I need you." She turned off the phone and dropped it in a trash can in the parking garage. Mitchell Johnson needed to learn the difference between wanting her and needing her, between loving her and using her, between appreciating her sacrifice and taking it for granted. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, Hannah Peterson would be 500 miles away, carrying nothing but her talent, her dignity, and a secret that would change everything. In his penthouse, Mitchell would wake to discover that losing his wife wasn't just losing a woman who loved him. It was losing the brilliant mind that had made him wealthy, the strategic genius that had made him powerful, and the only person who had ever believed in him enough to bleed for him. Chapter 3. The Empire Begins to Crack. Mitchell Johnson woke to silence for the first time in 3 years, and that silence felt like a death knell echoing through the penthouse that Hannah had designed to perfection. No coffee brewing in the kitchen using the custom blend she'd discovered in Portland. No shower running in the master bathroom with its sustainable water recycling system she'd installed. No soft jazz playing from the hidden speakers she'd wired throughout their home with acoustic precision. His head pounded from too much champagne and too little sleep. The events of the previous night crashed back with brutal clarity. The fight, Hannah's accusations, her final words that had seemed dramatic in the moment but now felt prophetic. The absence of sound was deafening, filled with the weight of systems that had operated invisibly under Hannah's management. The ring on his nightstand caught the morning light, its diamond facets throwing tiny rainbows across the ceiling Hannah had designed with precisely this effect in mind. Beside it lay an envelope with his name written in her distinctive architectural lettering, each letter perfectly spaced and proportioned. Mitchell's hands shook as he read her letter once, then twice, then a third time as the full implications settled into his consciousness like slow poison. She was gone, actually gone. And she'd taken something with her that he was only beginning to understand was the foundation of everything he'd believed about himself. His phone showed 37 missed calls from various business associates, all marked as urgent. The first voicemail made his blood run cold. "Mitchell, it's Commissioner Hayes. I received an interesting email from Hannah this morning regarding her departure from Johnson Development. We need to discuss the Portland project's environmental permits immediately. The federal compliance deadlines are approaching, and frankly, I'm not comfortable proceeding without her oversight." The second voicemail was worse. "Mr. Johnson, this is Richard Blackstone from Continental Bank. I'm calling regarding Ms. Peterson's message about stepping back from your projects. Given her integral role in our financing agreements and risk assessments, we need to schedule an emergency meeting to discuss our continued partnership. Her departure raises significant concerns about project viability. Mitchell scrolled through message after message, each one confirming the systematic destruction Hannah had orchestrated. She hadn't stolen anything or damaged anything or violated any agreements. She had simply removed herself, and apparently herself had been the foundation holding everything together. He tried calling her phone, disconnected. He tried her emergency contact at her old firm. Hannah Peterson no longer maintains professional relationships through this office. He tried her sister Maya in Chicago. Hannah asked me not to give you any information about her whereabouts, came the cold response before the line went dead. A knock at the door interrupted his mounting panic. Mitchell opened it to find Blake Morrison standing in the hallway with the confident smile of a predator who had caught the scent of blood in the water. Mitchell, I heard about your domestic difficulties. I wanted to offer my assistance during this challenging transition period. How did you get up here? Mitchell's building had security that rivaled federal buildings, systems Hannah had helped design and implement. I know people. Amazing connections you can make when you treat professionals with proper respect. Blake's smile widened with cruel satisfaction. Just like Hannah knew people. Incredible how many doors she opened for you, isn't it? How many relationships she managed while you played the charming figurehead. The truth hit Mitchell like a physical blow. Blake's inside information about their projects, his knowledge of confidential environmental studies, his perfect timing in approaching Hannah at the party, it all made sense now. He'd been cultivating sources within their operation, probably for months, waiting for exactly this kind of vulnerability. What do you want, Blake? To help, naturally. Portland is going to be a disaster without Hannah's environmental expertise and regulatory relationships. The City Council will never approve your permits without her input, and the federal agencies won't extend your compliance deadlines. But I have alternative proposals that could salvage the project. Alternative proposals? Our partnership. My resources and established relationships combined with your... well, whatever it is you bring to the table. Blake's mocking tone made it clear he knew exactly what Mitchell brought. Inherited money and surface-level charm that had been effective only when supported by Hannah's substance. Get out. Mitchell, be reasonable. You're about to lose everything. Without Hannah's strategic planning, her regulatory relationships, her innovative solutions to environmental challenges, what exactly do you think is going to hold your empire together? The question echoed in Mitchell's head long after he'd slammed the door in Blake's face. What exactly did hold his empire together? He'd always assumed it was his vision, his leadership, his natural business acumen. But standing in the apartment Hannah had designed, looking at the letter Hannah had written, surrounded by the silence Hannah had left behind, he was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth that had been hidden by years of comfortable assumptions. His first meeting of the day was with the Portland development team, 8 experienced professionals who had been working for months on the project that would make or break their company's future. Mitchell sat at the head of the conference table in their downtown office, trying to project confidence while secretly hoping someone else would take charge of the technical discussions. "Sir," began Janet Morrison, "the project manager, we've received several calls this morning about Ms. Peterson's departure. The environmental impact consultants are asking for direction on the Phase 2 assessments, and the federal compliance coordinators need immediate guidance on timeline adjustments." "What Phase 2 assessments?" Mitchell asked, then immediately regretted revealing his ignorance to his own employees. Janet exchanged glances with the other team members, their expressions shifting from professional deference to barely concealed concern. The assessments Hannah commissioned to address the wetland preservation concerns raised by the EPA. Without those completed studies, We can't proceed with ground preparation, much less actual construction. Where are the files on these assessments? Hannah kept all the environmental documentation in her personal files. She said she preferred to manage that aspect directly to ensure compliance with federal regulations. Of course she had. Hannah had compartmentalized the most critical elements of every project, making herself indispensable while protecting the company from his potential mismanagement. What he'd seen as trust had actually been damage control, her way of ensuring that his ignorance couldn't destroy what she'd built. "What about the backup financing Blake mentioned?" Mitchell asked desperately. "Sir, Continental Bank was our primary financing source. Hannah spent months cultivating that relationship after our previous bank expressed concerns about environmental liability risks. I'm not aware of any backup options, though Hannah may have been developing alternatives she hadn't shared yet." The meeting continued for 2 excruciating hours, each question revealing another gap in Mitchell's knowledge. Another system Hannah had managed without his awareness. Another relationship she had built while he'd been playing golf with potential investors who, it turned out, had been investing in her expertise rather than his inherited charm. By lunch, Mitchell's carefully constructed self-image had crumbled completely. He sat alone in his office, staring at his computer screen, where Hannah's shared folders now showed as inaccessible. She'd locked him out of systems he'd never known she'd created, databases he'd never bothered to explore, strategic documents he'd never thought to read. His assistant knocked tentatively. "Mr. Johnson, your mother is here to see you." Margaret Johnson swept into the office with the confidence of someone who believed she'd orchestrated a victory. Her perfectly styled silver hair and designer suit radiated satisfaction, the look of someone whose long campaign had finally succeeded. "Mitchell, darling, I heard the good news about Hannah. I know it's difficult now, but you'll see this was for the best. Now you can find someone appropriate, someone who won't embarrass the family at important social functions." The good news? Mitchell's voice was hollow, echoing strangely in his own ears. Her leaving, of course. "Now you can find someone who understands our world, someone who won't cause awkward situations with her background and her unfortunate scarring. Mother, Hannah built this company. Every major project, every strategic decision, every innovation that made us successful, that was her genius, her work, her relationships." Margaret's laugh was dismissive. The sound of someone who had never considered that intelligence might be more valuable than breeding. "Don't be ridiculous, darling. She was your wife, not your business partner. Architecture is just decoration, pretty drawings. The real work of business is what men do: leadership, vision, strategic thinking. The real work." Mitchell stood up so abruptly, his chair rolled backward into the wall. "Do you know what the real work was, Mother? It was Hannah spending 18-hour days solving problems I didn't even know existed. It was her building relationships with officials who wouldn't return my phone calls. It was her designing solutions to environmental challenges that would have shut us down completely. Mitchell, you're being emotional and irrational. You built this empire through your own talent and hard work, just like your father and grandfather before you." "No, I didn't." The admission tasted like ash in his mouth, bitter and final. "I built it through Hannah's talent and Hannah's hard work. I was just the face she put on her genius, the name she attached to her innovations." Margaret's smile faltered for the first time, uncertainty creeping across her features. "That's impossible. You're a Johnson. We don't need help from people like her." "People like her." Mitchell's anger finally found its target. Years of suppressed frustration and shame coalescing into clarity. "You mean intelligent people? Hard-working people? People who sacrifice their own dreams to build someone else's success? People who bleed for ungrateful cowards? I mean people who don't belong in our world, who don't understand our standards and expectations." "Our world is about to collapse without her, Mother. Every person you introduced me to, every investor you thought was impressed by the Johnson name, They were actually impressed by Hannah's work, her innovations, her strategic thinking. Mitchell walked to his office window, looking down at the city where Hannah had built his reputation, one relationship at a time, one brilliant solution at a time. In the reflection, he saw his mother's shocked face as the truth finally penetrated her willful ignorance. "I need to find her," he said quietly. "Mitchell, be reasonable. You can hire consultants, find new advisors, recruit experienced professionals. I need to find my wife." The words hung in the air as Mitchell realized their full significance. Not his business partner, not his strategic advisor, not the woman who'd made him rich and powerful and famous. His wife, the woman who'd loved him enough to bleed for him, and whom he'd loved too little to defend, when defending her required courage he didn't possess. Outside his window, Manhattan hummed with the energy of commerce and ambition, the same energy that had once flowed through his company when Hannah had been there to direct it with her brilliant mind. Now that energy felt chaotic and threatening, like a storm without a center, like a building without proper foundations. Mitchell Johnson had spent the morning discovering that his empire was built on foundations he'd never seen, maintained by systems he'd never understood, and powered by a mind he'd never truly appreciated. And somewhere out there, carrying his child and his future in her capable hands, the woman he'd dismissed was about to show him the difference between building something and simply putting your name on someone else's creation. Chapter 4. The search begins. 3 weeks had passed since Hannah's departure, and Mitchell Johnson's world was disintegrating with the mathematical precision she had once brought to building it. The Portland project had been indefinitely suspended when environmental activists filed injunctions that Hannah's missing impact studies could have prevented. Continental Bank had frozen their credit line pending a full review of their business strategy. 2 major clients had cancelled contracts, citing concerns about organizational stability and leadership competence. Mitchell sat in his office at 10 in the morning, surrounded by coffee cups and takeout containers, looking like a man who had forgotten how to live without someone managing the details of his existence. His usual confidence had been replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone slowly realizing that everything he'd believed about himself had been an elaborate illusion. His assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a liberty she'd never taken when Hannah had been around to manage his schedule with military precision. "Mr. Johnson, I have the private investigator's report." Michael Caine looked exactly like Central Casting's version of a private detective. Rumpled suit, tired eyes, and the demeanor of someone who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. He placed a thin folder on Mitchell's desk with the air of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Your wife is very good at disappearing," Caine began without preamble. "She used cash for everything, avoided credit cards, switched vehicles twice in the first week, and covered her digital tracks like someone with professional training. But nobody stays invisible forever, especially not someone with her professional reputation." Mitchell opened the folder with hands that trembled slightly from too much caffeine and too little sleep. The first photograph showed Hannah entering a small apartment building in Richmond, Virginia. She was wearing simple clothes and carrying grocery bags, looking smaller and more ordinary than he'd ever seen her. But even in the grainy surveillance photo, her posture radiated the confidence that had first attracted him 6 years ago. "She's renting a furnished apartment under her maiden name," Caine continued. "Working as a freelance architectural consultant for a small firm downtown called Community Design Associates. Living quietly, no social media presence, no contact with mutual friends from New York. Is she—" Mitchell couldn't finish the question, couldn't voice the possibility that had been haunting him since finding the unopened pregnancy test. "Pregnant?" "Yes, about 5 months along now by my estimation. She's been seeing a doctor regularly, taking excellent care of herself. Dr. Patricia Williams at Richmond Women's Health." The words hit Mitchell like physical blows. 5 months. Hannah had been carrying his child for 5 months, and he'd been too self-absorbed to notice the signs, too busy accepting credit for her work to pay attention to the woman doing it, too comfortable in his ignorance to recognize that she was creating life while building his empire. "Has she mentioned me? Asked about the company?" Kane's expression was carefully neutral, the look of someone who delivered difficult truths professionally. "Mr. Johnson, I need to be clear about something important. Your wife hired her own security consultant last week. She knows I've been looking for her." "What does that mean?" "It means she's been watching you too. The people I've talked to, the places I've searched, the inquiries I've made, she's known about all of it. She's allowed herself to be found on her own terms." The implications sank in slowly. Hannah wasn't hiding from him. She was controlling the pace of his search. Even now, even after leaving him, she was still several steps ahead, still managing the situation with the strategic thinking that had built his empire. The woman who had anticipated every business crisis was now orchestrating his personal crisis with the same methodical precision. "I need to go to Richmond," Mitchell said. "I wouldn't recommend that approach." "Not yet. Why not?" Kane pulled out another photograph, this one showing Hannah sitting in a coffee shop with her laptop open, clearly working on architectural drawings. But what caught Mitchell's attention was her expression, focused, determined, and absolutely at peace. She looked like someone who had rediscovered herself after being lost for too long. "Because she's not the same woman who left you, Mr. Johnson. She's stronger now, more confident in her own abilities, and she's not going to be impressed by grand gestures or desperate apologies from someone who never appreciated what he had." Mitchell studied the photo, trying to memorize every detail of the woman he'd lost through his own arrogance and cowardice. Her hair was shorter, cut in a practical style that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. She'd traded her designer clothes for simple, comfortable pieces that didn't announce wealth or status. But her hands were the same, graceful, expressive, capable of creating beauty or dismantling empires with equal skill. What exactly is she doing in Richmond? Working on a project that's getting significant attention in the architectural community. Low-income housing development with innovative, sustainable design features. The kind of work she used to do before she became your strategic advisor and started channeling her creativity into your commercial success. Before she sacrificed her dreams for his ambitions. Before she traded her passion for architecture that served communities for the more profitable work of making him wealthy and famous. "The local architecture community is buzzing about her project," Kane continued. "They're calling it innovative, compassionate, revolutionary. She's not just designing buildings. She's designing solutions to urban poverty and environmental challenges." Of course she was. Hannah had always seen architecture as more than just creating beautiful spaces. She'd seen it as a way to improve people's lives, to solve social problems through intelligent design. Mitchell had pushed her toward commercial development because it was more profitable. But her heart had always been in projects that mattered beyond profit margins. "I need her contact information. She's not taking calls from you. Mr. Johnson, trust me, I've tried on your behalf." Mitchell's phone buzzed, with yet another crisis requiring his immediate attention. The Seattle project needed immediate intervention to avoid cost overruns that would bankrupt the timeline. The Chicago development was facing union disputes that threatened to shut down construction entirely. The Miami expansion had hit regulatory snags that would have been routine problems for Hannah to solve through her network of professional relationships. He ignored the phone and focused on Kane's photographs, studying them like a man trying to decode the secret to happiness. In every image, Hannah looked purposeful and content in a way she'd never looked during their marriage. She'd been successful as his wife, but she'd been successful in service to his vision rather than her own dreams. "There's something else you need to know," Kane said quietly. She's been in contact with Blake Morrison. The name hit Mitchell like a cold slap across the face. What kind of contact? Professional consultation. He's been calling her about development projects, offering partnership opportunities. They've met twice for lunch at neutral locations downtown. She's working with Blake. Not yet, but he's courting her expertise aggressively. And he's smart enough to offer her what you never did. Full recognition for her work, creative control over projects, and respect for her professional abilities. Mitchell closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of his mistakes pressing down like a physical force. Blake Morrison understood Hannah's value in a way Mitchell had never bothered to learn. Blake saw her as a brilliant professional worthy of respect and partnership, not as a supporting character in someone else's success story. "What do you recommend?" Mitchell asked. Kane was quiet for a long moment, studying Mitchell with professional assessment. "Honestly, I recommend you figure out what you actually want from her. Because if you're looking for the woman who built your empire while staying in the background, she doesn't exist anymore. The woman in Richmond is building her own empire now, on her own terms." After Kane left, Mitchell sat alone in his office, surrounded by the trappings of success that felt increasingly hollow. The awards on his wall bore his name, but represented Hannah's achievements. The architectural magazines that had featured his projects contained photographs of buildings she had designed. Even the office itself reflected her aesthetic sense, her understanding of space and light and human psychology. He pulled up Hannah's new firm's website on his computer, reading about their commitment to sustainable design and social justice through architecture. Their current project gallery showcased the kind of thoughtful, innovative work that had made Mitchell's company successful when Hannah had been there to provide the vision. But here, Hannah's name was prominently featured as lead architect and design principal. Her vision was presented as her own, rather than attributed to someone else's leadership. The biographical section included a photograph of Hannah standing in front of one of her Richmond designs, wearing a hard hat and work clothes, looking completely in her element. The text described her as an innovative architect, dedicated to creating beautiful, functional spaces that serve communities rather than just corporate interests. Communities rather than just corporate interests. It was a pointed distinction, a clear statement about the work she chose to do now versus the work she'd done to make him successful and wealthy. Mitchell closed the laptop and walked to his office window. Looking out at the city Hannah had helped him conquer through her strategic brilliance. But conquest, he was beginning to understand, was different from creation. He'd conquered markets and competitors, while she'd created value and relationships and innovations. He'd built his reputation, while she'd built the foundation that made his reputation possible. His phone rang again. Another crisis. Another problem that would have been a simple conversation if Hannah were still there to handle it with her comprehensive understanding of every aspect of their business. But Hannah wasn't there. Hannah was in Richmond, building something new and beautiful and entirely her own. And for the first time since she'd left, Mitchell began to understand that finding her wasn't just about saving his company or recovering from his mistakes. It was about discovering whether the man she'd fallen in love with still existed somewhere underneath, the arrogant fool he'd become. Chapter 5. The Brilliant Mind Revealed. Mitchell Johnson had never been a man prone to introspection, but standing in Hannah's empty study at 3 a.m, surrounded by the ghosts of her genius, he was forced to confront the most painful truth of his privileged existence. He had been living in a house of mirrors, mistaking reflections of his wife's brilliance for his own intelligence. The room still smelled faintly of her perfume, a subtle lavender scent that had always calmed him when business pressures became overwhelming. Now it felt like an accusation, a reminder of the woman who had solved his problems while he'd been busy taking credit for the solutions. He'd come here every night for the past week, trying to piece together the mystery of his own success. Hannah had taken her active files, but she'd left behind 3 years of notebooks, architectural sketches, and strategic documents that revealed the true scope of her contribution to what everyone believed was his empire. The first notebook dated back to their early professional relationship, when she'd been his paid consultant and he'd been the ambitious developer trying to break into Manhattan's elite development circles with nothing but inherited money. Her handwriting filled every page with detailed analyses of market trends, regulatory challenges, and innovative design solutions. Project Meridian Tower read one entry from 2 years ago. Mitchell wants maximum glass and steel, focused purely on luxury square footage. But luxury market psychology demands uniqueness, not just size. Propose integrated green spaces on every floor, private terraces, sustainable systems that reduce monthly costs for owners. Position as investment in future value, not just present status. Mitchell remembered that project. It had been his breakthrough development, the innovative building that established Johnson Company as a serious player in luxury real estate. He'd presented the environmental features as his own vision of future-forward living. The press had praised his environmental consciousness and sophisticated understanding of modern luxury market psychology, but every innovative feature had originated in Hannah's notebooks. Every problem that had seemed insurmountable had been solved by her creativity. He flipped through pages of similar entries, watching the evolution of their company through Hannah's strategic thinking. She'd identified emerging neighborhoods before they became trendy, predicted regulatory changes months before they were announced, designed solutions to zoning challenges that other developers hadn't even recognized. Note on Mitchell's investor presentation strategy, read another entry. He's focusing too heavily on profit margins, not enough on market differentiation. Need to emphasize sustainability angle, not just environmental responsibility, but concrete long-term cost savings for buyers. Create detailed comparison charts showing energy costs over time. Position Johnson Company as intelligent luxury, not just expensive luxury. Mitchell closed his eyes, remembering that presentation. The investors had been initially skeptical until he'd shown them Hannah's charts and analyses. They'd been impressed by his sophisticated understanding of market forces. Sophisticated understanding. All Hannah's research and strategic thinking presented as his natural business acumen. The second notebook contained something even more devastating. Architectural sketches that had never been built. Plans for affordable housing that seamlessly integrated sustainability with beauty. Designs for mixed-income developments that could revitalize neighborhoods without displacing existing communities. Concepts for commercial spaces that would support local businesses rather than driving them out. These were the projects Hannah had dreamed of creating, the work that had excited her before she'd channeled all her creativity into making Mitchell Johnson a household name in luxury development. Her marginalia revealed her passion for architecture that served people rather than just profit. Could adapt this design for the Detroit waterfront redevelopment she'd written beside a sketch of a stunning residential complex. Create housing that existing residents can afford while attracting responsible new investment. Community spaces that celebrate neighborhood history rather than erasing it. Detroit, Hannah's hometown, where she'd grown up in a neighborhood that had been beautiful once. She'd mentioned wanting to return there someday, to use her skills to help rebuild her community. Mitchell had always dismissed the idea as impractical sentiment, but looking at her sketches now, he could see that her Detroit projects weren't naive idealism. They were sophisticated solutions to complex urban problems, the kind of innovative thinking that could revolutionize community development. She'd been years ahead of current trends towards socially conscious architecture. The third notebook was the most painful because it contained Hannah's analysis of their relationship, written with the same careful precision she brought to architectural problems. Mitchell presentation style needs work, read one early entry. He's naturally charismatic but impatient with technical details. Investors respond better to concrete data than abstract concepts. I should prepare comprehensive backup materials for his meetings, detailed projections, visual aids that support his natural charm with substantive content. She'd been helping him even then, recognizing his strengths while compensating for his weaknesses. But as the entries continued, Mitchell could see their dynamic shifting from partnership to dependency. Mitchell didn't review the environmental impact study before meeting with City Council, read a later entry. Had to intervene with last-minute analysis to prevent project delays. He's relying too heavily on my preparation. Need to find ways to ensure he understands details, not just talking points. Need to find ways, as if his ignorance were a problem she needed to solve, rather than a choice he'd made to let her handle complicated work while he enjoyed recognition. The entries grew shorter and more frustrated as time passed. Mitchell took credit for green building innovations in Architecture Today interview. Didn't mention collaborative process or my design role. Another investor meeting where I provided research he should have done himself, starting to feel like I'm running company while he's running publicity. Suggested Mitchell attend Sustainable Design Conference. He said he's too busy and asked me to go instead, then present summary. When did I become his research assistant? Mitchell set down the notebook, his hands shaking. He'd been so focused on being the face of their company that he'd never bothered to understand the brain behind it. Hannah had tried to teach him, to involve him in detailed work that made their success possible. But he'd been too lazy, too comfortable letting her carry the intellectual burden. The final entries were most damning. Mitchell's mother made another comment about my involvement in company operations, as if supporting my husband's career is somehow inappropriate. Mitchell laughed along instead of correcting her assumptions. Blake Morrison is circling, looking for weaknesses in our Portland project. Mitchell doesn't understand regulatory complexities well enough to recognize threats. Have prepared contingency strategies, but he needs to take ownership. Realized today that Mitchell introduces me as his wife who's also an architect, rather than his business partner who's also his wife. The order reveals what he thinks is primary. I'm disappearing in my own life. My ideas become his insights. My work becomes his achievement. My sacrifice becomes his success story. When did I agree to be invisible? Mitchell closed the notebook and walked to Hannah's drafting table, where she'd left one final drawing. It wasn't a building or development plan. It was a portrait of him, drawn with architectural precision but artistic compassion. She'd captured something he'd never seen in mirrors, potential that had never been developed, intelligence that had never been challenged, character that had never been tested. It was how she'd seen him at his best, or how she'd believed he could become. But underneath the portrait, in her careful lettering, she'd written a single question. What would you build if you had to build it yourself? Mitchell stared at the drawing until his vision blurred, understanding finally that Hannah hadn't just loved him despite his flaws. She'd loved the person she'd believed he could become. She'd spent 6 years trying to build that person, the same way she'd built their company, with patience, creativity, and skills he'd never bothered to develop. But buildings could be designed and constructed through careful planning. People had to choose to change themselves. As dawn broke over Manhattan, casting long shadows across Hannah's empty study, Mitchell Johnson began to understand that finding his wife meant first finding the man she'd believed in. The man who would build something himself instead of putting his name on someone else's creation. The man who would defend her honor instead of laughing along with her critics. The man who would love her completely instead of using her brilliance to avoid developing his own. That man was somewhere inside him, buried under years of laziness and entitlement. Hannah had seen him once. Now Mitchell had to find him too. Chapter 6. The Birth and the Breakdown. August arrived in Richmond with oppressive heat that makes pregnant women miserable and expectant fathers frantic. But Hannah Peterson faced her approaching delivery with the calm determination that had once built empires and now was building a new life entirely her own. At 34 weeks pregnant, she moved through her small apartment with practiced efficiency, preparing for the birth of her child, while Mitchell Johnson, 300 miles away in Manhattan, was slowly dying from ignorance and regret. Hannah's apartment was a study in purposeful simplicity, clean lines, natural light, and furniture that served function over status. She'd arranged her drafting table near the east-facing window where she could watch the sunrise while working. On her current project, a community center that would serve the neighborhood where she'd chosen to rebuild her life from scratch. Her phone rang as she reviewed blueprints for the project's innovative green roof system. The caller ID showed Dr. Patricia Williams, her obstetrician, and Hannah answered with the slight concern that had become automatic during the final weeks of pregnancy. "Hannah, I'm calling about your test results from yesterday's appointment. Everything looks excellent, but I want to discuss your birth plan once more, especially regarding support system arrangements." "I'm still planning on natural delivery, with minimal medical intervention, assuming no complications develop." "That's perfectly fine, but I want to confirm your emergency contact information one more time. You still have your sister Maya listed as primary contact, but no one listed as the baby's father or as secondary emergency contact." Hannah paused in her blueprint review. She'd known this question would come eventually, had prepared for it during sleepless nights when pregnancy insomnia forced her to confront realities she'd been avoiding. "The father isn't involved in our lives," she said quietly but firmly. "Hannah, I've been practicing obstetrics for 15 years, and I've never seen a woman more thoroughly prepared for single motherhood. But I also see how you look sometimes when you think no one is watching. Are you absolutely certain this is how you want to handle the birth?" "I'm certain." But she wasn't entirely certain, and Dr. Williams was too experienced to miss the hesitation in her voice. Hannah had spent countless sleepless nights wondering if Mitchell deserved to know about the child, if their baby deserved a chance to know its father. Then she would remember the sound of his laughter mixing with his mother's cruel jokes, the way he'd dismissed her pain as oversensitivity, the casual ease with which he'd suggested their marriage might have been a mistake. 300 miles away, Mitchell was learning about Hannah's pregnancy from Blake Morrison, who delivered the news with the strategic timing of a master manipulator who understood exactly when to strike at weakness. "Congratulations," Blake said, settling into the chair across from Mitchell's desk without being invited. "I hear you're going to be a father." Mitchell's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "What are you talking about?" "Hannah. She's pregnant, about 8 months along now, I believe. I'm genuinely surprised you didn't know." Blake's smile was razor-sharp, "though I suppose communication has been somewhat limited since she left you." The words hit Mitchell like a physical assault. 8 months. Hannah had been pregnant during their fight, carrying his child, when he'd suggested their marriage was a mistake, when he'd chosen his mother's approval over her dignity, when he'd let her walk away, believing he didn't want her. "How do you know this information?" Richmond is a surprisingly small architectural community, and word travels fast when someone of Hannah's caliber starts working on local projects. Blake leaned forward. "Mitchell, you're about to lose everything that ever mattered. Your company, your professional reputation, and now your family. Let me help you. Get out of my office." "I'm completely serious about helping. Hannah is brilliant, but she's also practical. She won't stay angry forever, especially once the baby arrives. But she will stay gone permanently if you don't give her compelling reasons to reconsider." "What kind of reasons?" "True partnership, Real professional recognition where she gets full credit for her work and genuine authority over her projects. I'm offering her exactly that, unless you're prepared to offer something substantially better. After Blake left, Mitchell sat alone in his office, staring at the photographs Kane had provided of Hannah in Richmond. Now, they told a completely different story. Her loose clothing wasn't just casual professional attire, it was maternity wear. Her careful posture wasn't just confidence, it was the measured movement of a woman carrying precious cargo. Her peaceful expression wasn't just professional satisfaction, it was the serene glow of a woman preparing to become a mother while building something entirely her own. He'd missed everything that mattered. Every doctor's appointment, every milestone, every moment of wonder and worry that should have been theirs to share. Hannah had been facing pregnancy alone while he'd been struggling to understand systems she'd created. Mitchell's assistant buzzed the intercom. "Mr. Johnson, your mother is here for your lunch appointment." He'd forgotten about lunch completely. Margaret Johnson entered with her usual dramatic flourish, but Mitchell barely looked up from the photographs. "Darling, you look absolutely terrible. Have you been eating properly? You need to take better care of yourself, especially now that you're finally free of that unfortunate marriage situation." "She's pregnant, Mother." Margaret's perfectly applied lipstick couldn't hide the sudden tightening of her mouth. "Who's pregnant?" "Hannah, my wife. She's carrying my child, and she's doing it alone because I proved I don't deserve to be part of their lives." "That's completely impossible. She would have told you about something that important." "Would she? After the way we treated her at every social function, after the way I let you and your friends mock her sacrifice?" Margaret's discomfort was visible. "Mitchell, you're being overly dramatic. If Hannah is really pregnant, which I seriously doubt, it's probably not even—" "Stop!" Mitchell's voice was quiet, but deadly. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't you dare question the integrity of the woman who saved my life. I'm just suggesting that woman had every possible reason to fabricate a pregnancy claim. Women like her use children to secure their financial futures. Women like her?" Mitchell stood up so suddenly, his chair rolled backward. "You mean women who save their husband's life? Women who build empires for ungrateful men? Women who sacrifice their own dreams to make someone else successful? You built this empire yourself." "No, I absolutely did not." The admission exploded out of him. "Hannah built every bit of it. Every strategy, every innovation, every successful project that you're so proud to claim. That was her work, her intelligence, her strategic thinking. I was just the face she put on her genius." Margaret's shock was genuine. "That's completely impossible." Mitchell gestured around his office at the awards and photographs that represented their company's achievements. "All of this exists because Hannah Peterson loved me enough to make me look brilliant while remaining invisible herself. And I repaid her sacrifice by letting people mock her courage." "She's not pregnant," Margaret said weakly. "She can't be. She is pregnant. And she's raising my child alone because I taught her through my cowardice that her love wasn't enough to earn my protection." Mitchell walked to his window overlooking Central Park, where he and Hannah had walked on lazy Sunday mornings during their early marriage, discussing their dreams and planning their future together. "I need to go to Richmond," he said with quiet determination. "Mitchell, be reasonable. Even if she is pregnant, she made the choice to leave you. Her choice." Mitchell turned to face his mother, and for the first time in his adult life, she stepped backward from what she saw in his eyes. "Her choice was to protect me with her body and her mind, and her love for 6 years. My choice was to take all of that for granted. You can't simply abandon your responsibilities here. My responsibilities here exist because of her work and her intelligence. Without Hannah, this company is just an expensive office and a name that won't mean anything once our current projects fail completely." Margaret looked around the office, as if seeing it for the first time. What about the Johnson family legacy? What legacy, Mother? Money I inherited? Social connections I was born into? Or the empire Hannah created with her brilliant mind, while I took credit for her achievements? She's just one woman. She's the only woman who ever loved me enough to bleed for me. And I let you convince me she wasn't good enough for our family when the truth is exactly the opposite. Mitchell moved toward the door. I'm not good enough for her family, but maybe I can become worthy of her forgiveness. As Mitchell left his office, abandoning his mother, standing among the monuments to Hannah's genius, he finally understood what Hannah had tried to teach him through 3 years of patient love. That being worthy of someone's sacrifice meant being willing to sacrifice something meaningful in return. He'd sacrificed nothing for Hannah during their marriage, but now he was prepared to sacrifice everything to prove he could become the man she'd believed in. The father their child deserved, and the husband who would defend her, honor instead of hiding behind her brilliance. The question was whether Hannah would give him the chance to try. Chapter 7. The Mirrors. Reflection. Mitchell Johnson stood in the exact spot where Hannah had saved his life, rain soaking through his expensive suit as he stared at the sidewalk where her blood had mixed with broken glass 2 years ago. The luxury restaurant behind him still bore a small scar on its brick facade from that violent night, a mark that matched the one on his wife's face and the deeper wounds on his conscience that had never properly healed. He'd been coming here every week since finding the photographs of pregnant Hannah thriving in Richmond, trying to understand the moment that had defined their relationship and his failure to honor it properly. The attack had been random. Derek Webb, a business rival drunk on whiskey and professional rejection. A broken bottle aimed at Mitchell's skull in a moment of rage, and Hannah stepping between them without hesitation or thought for her own safety. She'd taken the glass that was meant for him, blood streaming down her face as she'd whispered through her pain, "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" Even bleeding and scarred, her first concern had been for his well-being. The restaurant's owner, Roberto Castellanos, emerged from the back entrance with an umbrella, approaching Mitchell with the patient concern of someone who'd witnessed this weekly ritual for too long and recognized genuine remorse. "Mr. Johnson, you're going to catch pneumonia standing out here in this weather." "She didn't even hesitate," Mitchell said, his voice barely audible above the traffic and rain. "The bottle was coming straight for my head, and she just stepped in front of it. No thought for her own safety, no calculation of the cost to herself. Just pure protective instinct." Roberto nodded with the gravity of someone who understood the weight of witness. "I remember every detail. I was the one who called the ambulance. Your wife never made a sound, even with blood running down her face. She just kept asking if you were hurt, if you needed medical attention, and I repaid her courage by being embarrassed of the scar it left, by letting people mock her sacrifice at parties, by treating her heroism like it was somehow her fault or her problem to manage. You were young, still learning. I was selfish and cowardly," Mitchell interrupted with brutal honesty. "I should have been proud of that scar, should have told everyone who would listen that my wife was brave enough to bleed for me. Instead, I let my mother's friends turn it into a cruel joke about damaged goods and unsuitable wives." Roberto studied Mitchell's face with the careful assessment of someone who'd seen many kinds of men in his 30 years of running a restaurant in Manhattan's competitive dining scene. "What are you going to do about it now?" "I don't know if there's anything I can do. She's in Richmond, pregnant with my child, building a life that doesn't include me, and she's absolutely right to exclude me. I proved I don't deserve her or her forgiveness. Mr. Johnson, may I tell you something I've never mentioned before? That night, while we waited for the ambulance, your wife held your hand and said something I've never forgotten." Mitchell looked up sharply, desperate for any insight into Hannah's thoughts during that defining moment. "What did she say?" "She said, he's going to be so upset about this. He thinks everything difficult that happens is somehow his fault." even bleeding, even in pain. She was worried about how you would blame yourself for her injury. The words hit Mitchell like a physical blow, revealing the depth of Hannah's love and understanding even in her moment of greatest sacrifice. She'd known him well enough to predict his guilt, had loved him enough to worry about his emotional reaction to her physical pain, had understood his character better than he'd ever understood hers. She loved you with the kind of love that acts before it thinks, Roberto continued gently. But love like that needs to be protected, honored, celebrated. If you didn't do that then, the question is whether you're capable of doing it now. Mitchell left the restaurant and drove to his childhood home on Long Island, a Georgian mansion that had housed 3 generations of Johnson men and their carefully calculated marriages based on social advantage rather than genuine affection. His father had married for business connections. His grandfather had married for social advancement. Mitchell had been expected to follow the same pattern until Hannah had disrupted everything with her intelligence, her integrity, and her inconvenient capacity for selfless love. Margaret Johnson was in her sitting room when Mitchell arrived, surrounded by photographs of family achievements and social triumphs that suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless. She looked up from her correspondence with the pleased expression of someone who believed her son had finally come to his senses about his marriage. "Mitchell, darling, I've been calling your office repeatedly. Are you feeling better about the situation with Hannah? Ready to move forward more appropriately?" "Better?" Mitchell studied his mother's face, seeing clearly for the first time the cold calculation that had shaped his understanding of relationships and love. "Mother, do you remember the night Hannah was attacked?" "Of course I remember. Such an unfortunate incident that could have been avoided with better security. Do you remember what you said to me in the hospital emergency room?" Margaret's smile faltered slightly, uncertainty creeping into her expression. "I'm sure I said many things. It was a very emotional and stressful night for everyone involved. You said, at least the cut isn't on her face somewhere more visible. When the doctor told us she'd need reconstructive surgery to minimize scarring, you said, thank goodness it won't be too noticeable at formal events. I was trying to be optimistic and supportive. You were calculating social damage and managing potential embarrassment," Mitchell said with devastating clarity. "Hannah had just saved my life, and you were worried about how her sacrifice would look at charity galas and business functions. Mitchell, you're taking this far too seriously. I was concerned about her appearance because I knew you would be concerned, because appearances matter in our social circle." "No, Mother. You were concerned about appearances, period. Just like you've always been concerned about appearances instead of character, social status instead of substance, bloodlines and breeding instead of love and loyalty." Margaret stood up, her posture becoming defensive and rigid. "The Johnson family has maintained certain standards for generations." "What standards?" Mitchell's voice carried a fury that had been building for years. "Inheriting money we didn't earn? Attending parties where we pretend to be more important than we actually are? Marrying people who enhance our image rather than our lives and happiness? Those things matter, Mitchell. Social position, family connections, cultural compatibility. They're the foundation of successful marriages and stable families." "Hannah and I were compatible where it actually mattered," Mitchell said with growing conviction. "She was brilliant where I was intellectually lazy. She was brave where I was cowardly. She was generous where I was selfish. She made me better than I deserved to be." Mitchell walked to the fireplace where family portraits hung in expensive frames, studying the faces of Johnson men who'd built their lives on careful calculations and strategic marriages rather than passionate choices or genuine love. "Did you know Hannah grew up in Detroit? Her father was a construction worker who built the foundations other men got credit for. Her mother was a public school teacher who spent her own money on supplies for underprivileged children. They saved for years to send Hannah to architecture school because they believed in her talent and potential." Mitchell, why are you telling me these irrelevant details? Because those working-class parents raised a daughter who was brilliant enough to build an empire, brave enough to save a life, and loving enough to sacrifice her own dreams for someone else's success and recognition. Meanwhile, our family money bought me an education I coasted through and social connections I never earned through merit. Margaret's discomfort was increasingly visible. Breeding and background matter, Mitchell. These differences in values and expectations always surface eventually in marriages. You're absolutely right about differences surfacing, Mitchell said with bitter recognition. The differences did become clear. Hannah's background taught her to work hard, fight for what matters, and protect the people she loves with everything she has. My background taught me to take credit for other people's achievements and worry about what strangers think at social functions. You're being completely unfair to your family. Am I? Mitchell challenged directly. Mother, name one significant thing I accomplished before I met Hannah. One business success, one creative achievement. One moment where I proved myself worthy of the Johnson name through my own efforts rather than inherited advantages. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, unable to produce an answer that didn't rely on family money, social connections, or superficial charm that had never been tested by real challenges. Hannah made me worthy of my own name, Mitchell continued relentlessly. She built something meaningful from nothing, and she let me put my signature on her creation. She turned my lazy potential into actual achievement, my inherited advantages into earned success. And I repaid her generosity by being ashamed of the scar she earned saving my life. Mitchell, even if you're right about her contributions to your business, she still left you. She made her choice to abandon the marriage when difficulties arose. She left because I made my choice first, Mitchell said with painful clarity. I chose your approval over her dignity. I chose social comfort over moral courage. I chose the opinion of people who don't matter over the love of the only person who ever did matter. Mitchell moved toward the door, his decision crystallizing with each word he spoke. I'm going to Richmond to find her. To do what exactly? Beg her to come back? She's moved on, Mitchell. She has a completely new life now. To try to become the man she believed I could be. To prove I can defend her honor when it costs me something significant. To show her that her sacrifice meant everything to me, even if I was too much of a coward to say so when it mattered. And if she rejects you completely? Mitchell paused at the threshold, looking back at the woman who'd shaped his understanding of love as a transaction rather than a transformation. Relationships as strategic alliances rather than emotional partnerships. Then I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of her rejection and raising our child to understand that love requires sacrifice, not just comfort. Because Hannah Peterson loved me enough to bleed for me, and the least I can do is love her enough to change for her. As Mitchell left his childhood home, he carried with him the weight of 34 years of entitled assumptions and lazy choices that had nearly cost him everything that mattered. But he also carried something else, the memory of Hannah's courage, the knowledge of her sacrifice, and the desperate hope that he might still have time to become the husband her heroism deserved. The question wasn't whether he could find Hannah in Richmond. The question was whether he could find the man she'd believed in before she gave up hope entirely. Chapter 8. The Powerful Woman Rises. Hannah Peterson stood before the Richmond City Council holding blueprints that would revolutionize affordable housing in Virginia. Her pregnancy visible beneath a tailored blazer that announced competence rather than vulnerability. 8 months pregnant and commanding a room full of politicians and developers with the quiet authority of someone who'd built empires and now chose to build communities that served people rather than profit margins. The Riverside Commons project, isn't just about creating housing units, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed council chamber with the confidence that had once intimidated Manhattan socialites and now impressed Virginia bureaucrats. It's about creating a sustainable community that honors the families who've lived here for generations while welcoming new residents who will contribute to our neighborhood's continued growth and prosperity. Council Chairman Robert Hayes leaned forward, studying the detailed plans Hannah had spent 6 months perfecting, with the same meticulous attention she'd once brought to Mitchell's luxury developments. Miss Peterson, your proposal shows 300 affordable units, but the private developers who've approached us previously claimed they could only make 150 units economically viable on this site. Those developers were thinking like traditional profit-maximizing businesses instead of thinking like architects who understand community needs, Hannah replied, moving to her presentation board with the graceful confidence that had once made her legendary among New York's architectural elite. They saw obstacles and limitations where I see opportunities for innovation and creative problem-solving. Her presentation was masterful, combining environmental sustainability with social responsibility in ways that made compelling financial sense for both investors and residents. Mixed-income housing that would prevent the economic segregation plaguing most urban developments. Green spaces designed to improve air quality while providing community gathering areas where neighbors could build relationships. Commercial spaces designed specifically to support local businesses rather than chain stores that would drain money from the neighborhood economy. The construction timeline shows completion in 18 months, noted Councilwoman Patricia Hayes, reviewing the technical specifications with obvious appreciation. That's significantly faster than comparable projects we've approved recently because we're using innovative modular construction techniques combined with sustainable materials, sourced from Virginia suppliers whenever possible. It creates local jobs while reducing environmental impact and construction costs, allowing us to pass savings directly to residents. Hannah had learned these efficiency innovations during her years managing Mitchell's high-end projects, but now she was applying them to work that mattered to her personally, rather than just professionally. The Riverside Commons would house families like the one she'd grown up in, working-class parents who scrimp and save to give their children better educational and economic opportunities. Blake Morrison sat in the back of the chamber, watching Hannah's presentation with the calculating interest of someone who recognized exceptional talent when he saw it. He'd been courting her expertise for months, offering consulting contracts and partnership opportunities that would have been unthinkable in her previous life as Mitchell's invisible strategic advisor. Ms. Peterson, Blake said during the public comment period, rising with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. I represent Morrison Development Group, and we'd like to formally propose a partnership on this ambitious project. Your innovative vision combined with our established resources and market connections could create something truly remarkable for Richmond. Hannah's expression remained professionally neutral, but her response was pointed and deliberate. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your interest and your company's reputation, but Riverside Commons is specifically designed to be community-controlled rather than corporate-controlled. The residents will have ownership stakes in their housing and voting, rights in all future development decisions affecting their neighborhood. It was a direct rejection of the traditional developer model where outside investors profited handsomely from community displacement and gentrification. Hannah was proposing something genuinely radical. Development that empowered existing residents rather than exploiting their economic vulnerability. After the presentation, Hannah packed her materials with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who just completed a professional marathon. The council had voted unanimously to approve her project, making her the youngest architect ever to win a municipal contract of this scale and social significance in Richmond's history. Dr. Patricia Williams, her supervisor at Community Design Associates, waited outside the council chamber with the proud smile of someone who'd just watched her star employee triumph over skepticism and bureaucracy. Hannah, that presentation was absolutely incredible. 3 months ago, you were a freelance consultant working out of coffee shops and shared office spaces. Today, you just secured a $20 million project that's going to fundamentally change how this city approaches affordable housing development. 3 months ago, I was someone else entirely, Hannah replied, one hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. Someone who built other people's dreams and visions instead of her own. Someone who made other people successful while remaining invisible herself. They walked to Hannah's car together, Dr. Williams still buzzing with excitement about the council's enthusiastic response and the media attention the project was already generating. Blake Morrison seemed very interested in working with you directly. That kind of high-level partnership could open doors to similar projects across the entire Southeast region. Blake Morrison represents everything I deliberately left behind in New York, Hannah said with quiet conviction. He sees opportunity where he should see community responsibility. He wants to use my innovative ideas to make himself wealthy and powerful rather than to serve families who actually need quality housing. And you want to use your ideas to prove that architecture can serve people instead of just generating profit for investors. That development can strengthen existing communities instead of destroying them through gentrification. Hannah paused beside her car, looking back at the government building where she'd just secured funding for her vision. And to show my child that true success means using your talents and education to make the world more just and beautiful, not just to make yourself wealthy and famous. That evening, Hannah sat in her small apartment, reviewing congratulatory emails from colleagues across the country who understood the professional and social significance of her achievement. The architectural community was buzzing about her innovative approach to affordable housing, and she'd already received inquiries about similar projects in 3 other cities, where progressive officials were interested in community-centered development models. Her laptop showed an incoming video call from her sister Maya in Chicago, and Hannah accepted with the tired but genuine smile of someone who'd just accomplished something truly important. I watched the entire council meeting online, Maya said immediately, her excitement obvious even through the digital connection. Hannah, you were absolutely incredible up there. I've never seen you look so confident, so completely yourself, and comfortable in your own expertise. I feel like myself for the first time in years, Hannah replied with deep satisfaction. Like I remember who I was before I became someone's support system and strategic advisor. Before I started channeling all my creativity into making someone else successful. Any word from Mitchell recently? Hannah's expression tightened slightly, the only sign that the question still carried emotional weight. His private investigator has been asking questions around town for weeks. I know he knows where I am and what I'm doing. And how do you feel about that? I feel nothing, Hannah said, though her tone suggested the situation was more complex than complete indifference. I'm not the same woman who left New York 8 months ago feeling broken and invisible. I'm not someone who builds empires for ungrateful husbands who take all the credit. I'm someone who builds communities for families who genuinely need them and appreciate them. Maya studied her sister's face through the video connection, noting changes that went deeper than professional success. You look genuinely happy, Hannah. Tired from the pregnancy and the work, but deeply satisfied in a way I haven't seen since architecture school. I am happy, Hannah confirmed with quiet conviction. I'm doing work that matters to me personally, not just work that makes someone else successful and famous. I'm respected and credited for my own ideas and innovations, not just tolerated as someone's wife who happens to have professional opinions. And I'm about to become a mother on my own terms, raising my child according to my own values rather than as part of someone else's family legacy and social expectations. What if Mitchell shows up here unexpectedly? Hannah was quiet for a long moment, considering the question she'd been avoiding but knew was inevitable. Then he'll discover that the woman he dismissed and undervalued is doing more than just surviving without him. I'm thriving, creating meaningful work, and building something beautiful that serves people who actually need it. But do you miss him at all? The question hung in the digital space between them. Hannah closed her laptop and moved to her window, looking out at the neighborhood she was helping to rebuild through intelligent, compassionate design. Families were walking home from work, children were playing in small front yards, and elderly residents were sitting on porches, watching the world go by, with the patience that came from generations of community investment and mutual support. "I miss who I thought he was," she said finally with painful honesty. "I miss the man I believed he could become if he ever chose to develop his own character and capabilities. But I don't miss being invisible in my own life, being undefended in my own marriage, being unrecognized for my own achievements." Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Williams. "Hannah, wanted to remind you about tomorrow's appointment. With the baby due in 4 weeks, we need to finalize all birth plan details and emergency procedures." 4 weeks until she became a mother. 4 weeks until she welcomed Mitchell's child into a life he'd chosen not to be part of through his own failures and cowardice. 4 weeks until she proved definitively that love didn't require the compromise of self-worth, that sacrifice didn't require invisibility, that building something beautiful and meaningful was more important than attaching your name to someone else's creation. Hannah Peterson had learned to be powerful without apology, brilliant without permission, and successful without sacrificing her values or her visibility. She'd discovered that the woman who'd built Mitchell's empire was capable of building something far more meaningful and lasting when she was building it for herself and for communities that genuinely needed her expertise. The question wasn't whether Mitchell would eventually find her in Richmond. The question was whether he'd be capable of recognizing the woman she'd become, someone who no longer needed his approval, his platform, or his family name to prove her professional worth and personal value. Someone who'd finally learned that the most powerful thing a woman could do was refuse to make herself smaller, invisible, or less threatening to accommodate someone else's insecurity and laziness. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Mitchell Johnson arrived in Richmond on a grey October morning with nothing but a rental car, a hotel reservation, and the kind of desperate hope that belonged to men who'd finally understood they'd lost everything that mattered. He'd spent the 3-hour drive rehearsing apologies that sounded hollow even to himself, trying to find words adequate for betrayals that went deeper than language could reach. Hannah's neighborhood surprised him with its vitality and purposeful development. He'd expected something diminished, a place where she'd retreated to lick her wounds. Instead, he found a vibrant community of tree-lined streets, restored Victorian houses, and thoughtful urban development that created genuine homes rather than just housing. The irony wasn't lost on him that Hannah had found in Richmond what she'd tried to create in New York, a place where architecture served people instead of profit margins. Her apartment building was a converted 19th-century mansion that had been transformed into 6 elegant units, each space designed to provide privacy while encouraging community interaction. Hannah's unit was on the ground floor, her large windows revealing glimpses of drafting tables and architectural models that suggested productive work rather than hiding. Mitchell sat in his rental car for 40 minutes, gathering courage that should have come naturally to a man who'd once commanded boardrooms and dominated headlines. But those had been borrowed courage, borrowed from Hannah's strategies and preparation. Now he was alone with his own cowardice. When he finally approached her door, Hannah opened it before he could knock. She'd been watching from her window, he realized, managing this encounter the same way she'd once managed his business crises, with careful preparation and complete control. 8 months pregnant, she was luminous in a way that suggested health, purpose and deep satisfaction rather than fragility. Her hair was shorter, styled to emphasize her intelligence rather than soften it for social acceptability. She wore simple clothes that announced professional competence and personal confidence rather than wealth or status. But it was her posture that struck him most powerfully. Straight-backed, centered, uncompromising. This wasn't a woman waiting to be rescued. This was a woman who'd rescued herself. Mitchell. Her voice was steady and professional, the tone she might use with a contractor seeking clarification. "Hannah?" His voice cracked like an adolescent's. "You look absolutely incredible." "Thank you. You look exhausted." The observation was clinical rather than sympathetic. Hannah had always been able to read his emotional state before he'd recognized it himself. But now she offered the diagnosis without the care package that had once accompanied it. "Can I come in?" Hannah stepped aside without answering, leading him into an apartment that was simultaneously familiar and foreign. Her furniture was the same, arranged with the same aesthetic sense that had made their Manhattan penthouse a showcase. But the space felt fundamentally different, smaller and more intimate, warmer and more authentically personal. Her drafting table dominated the living room like an altar to creativity, covered with blueprints and architectural models that represented work she'd chosen rather than inherited. "I know about the baby," Mitchell said without preamble. "I assumed you did. Your investigator hasn't been particularly subtle. Why didn't you tell me yourself?" Hannah settled into her desk chair with the careful movements of advanced pregnancy, studying Mitchell with the same focused attention she once gave to complex structural problems. "When would I have told you?" she asked with devastating precision. "During the fight where you suggested our marriage was a mistake? After you chose your mother's approval over my dignity? Before or after you decided I was too sensitive about the scar I earned saving your life?" Each question landed like a blade, precise and devastating. Mitchell had hoped for anger, for tears, for any emotion that suggested he still had the power to affect her. Instead, he faced the calm assessment of someone who'd moved beyond hurt into clarity. "I was wrong about everything," Mitchell said desperately. "I see that now with perfect clarity." "What exactly do you see, Mitchell?" "I see that I never appreciated what you did for me. I see that I took credit for your work and let people mock your sacrifice. I see that I was a coward who hid behind your strength instead of developing my own character." Hannah nodded, as if he'd correctly answered the first question on an examination. "And what do you want from me now?" "I want to make everything right. I want to be the father our child deserves and the husband you deserved from the beginning. I want to prove I can change fundamentally." "How?" The simple question contained infinite complexity. How did a man prove he'd changed when change required consistent actions over time rather than dramatic gestures? How did someone demonstrate genuine growth when the demonstration itself might be just another performance? "I don't know," Mitchell admitted with painful honesty. "I spent the entire drive rehearsing elaborate speeches about how sorry I am and how much I've learned. But sitting here, looking at what you've built without me, I realize I don't even know what the right apology looks like." "It doesn't look like anything, Mitchell. Apologies are just words. I'm interested in genuine transformation, not verbal performance." "Then tell me how to transform. Give me a roadmap I can follow." Hannah stood and walked to her window, looking out at the neighborhood she was helping to rebuild. When she turned back, her expression had softened slightly, but not with forgiveness. With something more complex, pity mixed with recognition. "You can't transform for me, Mitchell. That's the fundamental mistake you're still making. You think this is about becoming the person I want you to be. But I don't want you to be anyone specific anymore. I've learned to live completely without you. The words hit harder than anger would have. Mitchell had prepared for her rage, her hurt, her conditions for reconciliation. He hadn't prepared for complete indifference. "You don't mean that." "I mean it with absolute certainty," Hannah replied calmly. "The woman who left New York 8 months ago was desperate for your love, your recognition, your protection. She would have accepted any apology that promised change. But I'm not that woman anymore." Hannah gestured around her apartment at the tangible evidence of her independent success. "I've remembered who I was before I became your supporting actress. I'm an architect who designs communities instead of monuments to ego. I'm a professional who gets full credit for her own work. I'm a woman who doesn't need anyone's permission to be brilliant. What about our child? Our child will have one parent who puts their well-being first, and one parent who put himself first for 34 years, and then decided to change when it became convenient." Mitchell felt the conversation slipping away from him, felt Hannah's calm certainty eroding every argument he'd prepared. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Hannah's composure cracked slightly, revealing the steel underneath. "You want to discuss fairness? Fair would have been you defending me at parties instead of laughing along with cruel jokes. Fair would have been you crediting my work instead of accepting praise for achievements you didn't earn. Fair would have been you protecting my dignity instead of sacrificing it for social comfort. I know I failed you repeatedly." "You didn't fail me, Mitchell. Failure implies you tried and couldn't succeed. You chose not to try. There's a difference between failure and indifference, between mistakes and character defects." Mitchell moved closer desperately. "Hannah, I love you. I know I didn't show it properly, but I do love you with everything I have. You love the woman who made you successful. You love the woman who solved your problems and managed your image and asked for nothing visible in return. But you never loved me enough to see me as a complete person, to defend me when defense required courage, to choose me when choosing me would cost you something. I choose you now. Now that your empire is collapsing without my strategic thinking, now that Blake Morrison is offering me partnerships you never considered, now that I'm about to give birth to your child and you're facing consequences." Hannah shook her head with sad certainty. "You're not choosing me, Mitchell. You're choosing survival." The brutal truth settled over Mitchell like a heavy shroud. She was completely right. He'd come to Richmond not because he'd discovered genuine love, but because he'd discovered desperate need. His supposed transformation wasn't about becoming worthy of her. It was about recovering what he'd lost. "What do I have to do?" he asked quietly. "Nothing at all," Hannah replied with finality. "Do nothing that involves me. Build your own empire without stealing credit for someone else's genius. Defend women who can't defend themselves instead of performing courage only when it benefits you. Learn to love someone more than you love your own comfort." Hannah moved toward the door, signaling the end of their conversation. "And do all of it because it's morally right, not because it might win me back. And if I do all that, if I actually change fundamentally," Hannah paused at the door, her hand resting on the brass knob, "then you'll be the man I once believed you could become. And that will have to be enough for you, because I won't be there to witness it." "Hannah, please. I have a doctor's appointment in 1 hour, Mitchell. You can see yourself out." As the door closed behind him, with quiet finality, Mitchell stood alone in the hallway of the building where Hannah had rebuilt her life without any need for his presence or approval. Through her windows, he could see her moving with purposeful energy, preparing for appointments and projects that had nothing to do with his needs or timeline. For the first time in his privileged life, Mitchell Johnson understood what it meant to love someone enough to want their happiness more than your own presence in it, to respect their choices, even when those choices excluded you completely. The question was whether he was strong enough to prove that love through absence and transformation instead of demanding, to prove it through reconciliation and grand gestures that served his needs more than hers. Chapter 10. The rebuild. Spring came to Richmond with gentle insistence, and Mitchell Johnson returned with it, carrying 18 months of genuine transformation and uncertain hope that love could survive the distance between who he'd been and who he'd become. His rental car held no grand gestures or desperate proclamations, only the quiet tools of a man who'd learned to build his own character the way Hannah had once built their empire, with patience, precision, and purpose. The man who stepped out in Hannah's neighborhood looked familiar, but carried himself differently. Gone was the borrowed confidence that had masked insecurity. In its place was the settled assurance of someone who discovered his own competence through failure and painstaking reconstruction. Hannah was sitting on her front porch when he arrived, their 13-month-old daughter playing at her feet with wooden blocks that spelled architectural terms: beam, arch, foundation. The child had Hannah's intelligent eyes and Mitchell's determined chin, a perfect synthesis of their best qualities. "Hello, Mitchell." Hannah's voice was warmer than their last meeting, but still cautious. "Hello, Hannah." He remained by the car, understanding permission needed granting. "She's beautiful. Her name is Grace Peterson." The surname choice was deliberate, a clear statement about family identity. Grace. Mitchell repeated the name like a prayer. It suits her perfectly. She's walking now, saying words. Very determined, very intelligent. Hannah's pride was evident. She designs actual structures with her blocks, not random towers. Of course, his daughter showed Hannah's genius. Mitchell smiled despite the ache in his chest. "I brought something, may I?" Hannah studied his face carefully, then nodded. Mitchell retrieved a portfolio from his car, moving slowly to demonstrate respect for boundaries. "Grace, this is your father," Hannah said quietly. "Mitchell, would you like to sit?" Permission granted, Mitchell settled on the porch steps, maintaining respectful distance while opening his portfolio. The first document made Hannah's eyes widen. Architectural plans for sustainable housing in Detroit, with Hannah Peterson listed as lead architect and primary stakeholder. "I've spent the last year working on this," Mitchell said quietly. "Your hometown needs exactly the community-focused development you designed here. I've secured funding, obtained permits, established partnerships with local groups." Hannah studied the blueprints with practiced skill. "This is incredible work, Mitchell. Whose design? Mine. I learned to draw, think architecturally, see buildings as solutions to social problems rather than profit opportunities." Mitchell paused, watching Grace stack blocks with engineering precision. "I'll never be the architect you are, but I wanted to prove I could create something myself instead of just putting my name on someone else's vision." "Why Detroit?" "Because it's where you're from. Because it's where your heart has always been. Because I wanted to build something worthy of your homecoming, if you ever choose to come home." Hannah set down the blueprints, looking at him directly. "You're offering me a project? I'm offering you ownership. Full creative control, community partnership, everything you've always wanted. And I'm offering to work for you, if you'll have me." "Work for me? As your business manager, strategic advisor, support system, the way you worked for me. Except this time, the brilliant architect gets credit for being the brilliant architect." Mitchell pulled out a second set of documents, legal papers transferring ownership of his remaining New York properties to a foundation bearing Hannah's name, established to fund architectural projects that served communities rather than developers. "I liquidated the company, Hannah. Sold everything I could, donated the proceeds to causes you care about. I kept enough to live modestly and fund the Detroit project, but everything else went to environmental groups, literacy programs, architectural education funds." Hannah's composure finally cracked. "You gave away your empire?" "It was never my empire." "It was yours. I just returned it to its rightful owner." "Mitchell, that's not what I wanted." "I know. You wanted me to become the kind of man who would choose your dignity over social approval, who would defend your honor when it cost me something, who would love you enough to change without being asked." Mitchell gestured to the documents spread between them. "So I did. You did this for me. I did this for Grace, so that when she's old enough to ask about her father, you can tell her he wasn't always worthy of her mother's love, but he became someone who was." Grace toddled over to Mitchell, offering him one of her blocks with the generous spirit of childhood. He accepted it carefully, as if she were handing him something infinitely precious. "She wants to know you," Hannah said quietly. "I've told her stories about her father, shown her pictures. I'd never wanted her to grow up without knowing where she came from. And now—" Hannah was quiet for a long time, watching their daughter attempt to teach Mitchell the architectural principles embedded in her block play. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 18 months of careful consideration. Now I think her father might be ready to learn those principles himself. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was possibility. Mitchell spent the afternoon on Hannah's porch, learning his daughter's vocabulary and watching the woman he'd lost build something beautiful with blocks and laughter and patient instruction. When the sun began to set, Hannah walked him to his car with Grace balanced on her hip. "The Detroit project," she said. "I want to see the community partnerships you've established. I want to meet with the neighborhood groups, understand their needs, make sure this is what they want, rather than what we think they need." "Of course." "And Mitchell, if I agree to this, I'm the architect. You're the support staff. No shared credit, no joint interviews, no confusion about who's the genius and who's the assistant." "Understood completely. And we take this slowly. Grace and I have built a good life here. Any change has to make that life better, not just different." Mitchell nodded, understanding that he was being offered a chance to prove himself rather than a guarantee of reconciliation. It was more than he deserved and exactly what he needed. As he drove back to his hotel, Mitchell carried with him the sound of his daughter's laughter and the memory of Hannah's careful smile. He'd learned to love them enough to disappear from their lives, and perhaps that love had finally made him worthy of being invited back into them. The rebuild would take time, trust earned in small increments rather than grand gestures. But Mitchell Johnson had finally learned the most important lesson Hannah had tried to teach him, that the strongest foundations were built not from inherited materials, but from the slow, careful work of becoming someone worthy of the love you'd been given. Grace Peterson would grow up knowing her father as a man who'd learned to build his own character before presuming to build anything else. And perhaps, if he proved himself worthy of the chance, she might also know him as the man who'd loved her mother enough to become the husband Hannah's sacrifice had always deserved.